Okay, let's see how we can handle exceptions that we are aware of that could happen, that could go into this exchange and this queue, and how we can deal with that and take corrective action and then resend the message so that the search service gets updated. This is going to be a bit of a convoluted example to engineer this kind of fault. So it's not a realistic example, but it's just an example of how we can do something with our faults that are generated by our consumers and then put into these queues. So back to VS Code, and let's see. So we'll go to our auction created consumer, and let's say, for example, that we're not going to accept any cars named Foo. And we're going to throw an exception if we do receive from our messages car that have the model name of Foo. I can't give you a good reason for why we're about to do this, but it is an example of handling the faults in our consumers. So I'm going to say if the item model equals Foo, then we're going to throw a new arguments exception and just say cannot sell cars with name of Foo. Yeah, okay, so it's an example. So what's going to happen then if we create an auction is we're going to consume this message and throw this exception. So let's make sure that actually happens, and I'll just make sure the service is restarted and we've got the hot reload of changes succeeded. And if I go across to Postman, once again, I'll create a new auction and we'll just change the name of the model here from a GUID to be Foo, and I'll click send. And the auction gets created and we got the model name of Foo. And if we go back to VS Code and take a look at the console, then we can see that we've got our exception. And once again, we're in a position where we've got inconsistency in our database. So what we can do is that we can consume from the fault queue and take a corrective action based on what is in that queue. So we'll go across and we're going to create a consumer in our auction service that's going to take a look at the error queue and do something with it. So we'll go into our auction service and we'll create a new folder and we'll call it consumers. And inside here we'll create a new file that's going to be a class, and we're going to call this auction created fault consumer. And inside here this is going to derive from the iConsumer interface, and we need to use the fault type and specify the type of contract, which is auction created in this case, and we'll implement the interface, make it an async task, and we've got our context which is going to contain the fault message, and let's just add the code we need for this. So we'll start with the console write line just to help us see what's going on in the console. And I'll just say consuming faulty creation. And we'll get hold of the exception. So we'll say var exception equals context.message.exceptions.first. And we'll check to see if the exception type is the argument exception that we created. Or exception type is equal to, and we need to say system.argument exception. And if that is the case, then we're going to take what's inside our context and say context.message and message.model, because we know that's what it's going to be failing on, and we're going to change this to foo bar, which would be accepted by our search service. And then we're going to say await and context, and we're going to use the publish method from inside here. Because we're inside the context of a consumer, we have access to publish, and we'll say context.message.message, and we're going to send this back onto the service bus, which again is going to be picked up by our search service and should result in a car being created with the model of foo bar if we attempted to create a car with a model of foo. And we'll just add an else condition for anything else, any other types of exceptions. We're only going to attempt to handle this particular one. And like I say, it's just an example. It's not really a real world example, this of course. And we'll just say not an argument exception updates error dashboard somewhere, which of course we do not have. Okay, and because this is a new consumer inside our auction service, then we need to tell Mass Transit about this as well. So we're going to head to the program class inside the auction service, and we need to add our consumers. So we'll say X and add consumers from namespace containing, and we only have one consumer at the moment. So this is going to be the auction created fault consumer. And we'll also set the name point formatter at the same time. So we'll say X set name or set endpoint name formatter. And we'll use the same as we did for the search service, and we'll use the kebab case endpoint name formatter. I'll just specify auction as the prefix and set the namespace to false as I did before. And this should be good enough to test the functionality. So if we go back to Postman, or in fact, let me just double check that things have restarted as they are supposed to. So I'll go to the auction service, and that's what we've just updated. I'm actually just going to restart just to make sure things are up and running as I'd expect them to be. That's fine. I'll do the same for the search service because the logs are quite messy. So I'll just do .NET Watch here as well and make sure it starts cleanly. And that's fine. And make sure the services are all up and running, and that looks good as well. And what we should find now, if we do create a new auction with the model name of foo, then that's going to fault, create an exception that's going to be picked up by the auction service. The auction service is going to change the name of the model, send out the message back to the bus, which is going to be picked up again by the search service, but this time it's going to have a name that's acceptable and not throw an exception on it, and update our database. So quite a lot of things going on for this fairly simple and convoluted example. So I'll click send, off it goes, and we create an auction called foo. And what should have happened now is that our auction service should have picked up that faulted message, and we can see that we're consuming the faulty creation there, which means it would have put that message back on the bus. Our search service would have picked it up, but let's go take a look. And if we search for an item that has the name foo bar and click send, then sure enough we can see the foo bar car in our list, and that's the one that's been dealt with by the auction service when it faulted. So a very convoluted example of fault handling, but it's just to give you the idea of how to go about it. And depending on what you're building, what your code is, what you want to do with these exceptions, it's just an approach you can take to do something if there is some corrective action, but it's probably something that you'd think about putting into some kind of logging or error dashboard somewhere for somebody to go and manually take a look at, rather than automatically changing the properties as per this example here. So a couple more tasks to go, and we need to deal with the updating and deleting auctions or consumers, and we'll take a look at the approach we're going to take to that next. Okay, we've got a couple of consumers to go because we've got a couple of contracts that we haven't dealt with yet, the auction updated and the auction deleted. And if we go to our auctions controller, then we've got the endpoints in here already for this functionality. But we need to publish this to the service bus using the outbox that we've already configured, obviously, for the auction service, and do the same for the delete auction as well. Now your mentor's taken a break and he's decided this is a good opportunity for you to get your hands dirty and give this a go yourself. Now the goal of this particular challenge is, if we go to Postman, we can see in this checkpoint folder there's several tests, and we've got one to create a new auction, same as what we've been using before, but with a random first name instead of a GUID. And Then we've got a test to make sure that was created in the search service, same as before. Then we've got a request to go and update the auction, and this is simply going to populate these properties along with an updated property on the created item model. And then we're going to go and get the updated item from search and expect that to contain updated. Following that, we're going to delete the auction, and then we're going to make sure the auction has been deleted, all inside the search service as well. So we don't have consumers for this yet, so if I run these tests and I click on the checkpoint folder and click run, and oh, look at this, 150% used. I wonder if this is going to start failing soon because I keep running these tests, but I'm going to try it again. But if I run this, then it's going to go through and execute all these requests, but I've got 2 failing tests. And this is getting the item updated from the search service, and getting the item created is returning a result because something hasn't been deleted from the search service. So we want all of these tests to pass, and that will be the goal that you're trying to reach for this particular challenge. Now, don't worry if you don't get this working or you get stuck or whatever. You can always refer to the repository, the demo repository on GitHub for this training course, to give you a few hints if you get stuck. You'll also need to review the documentation for MongoDB entities to do things that we haven't done yet. And if we take a look at the entities, then we've got the update options and delete options. So please do take a look at the documentation here to get a few clues about what you can do for this. And just as a small hint, the one that I chose to use to do this is to use the modify only the properties that we're expecting to be updated. Also, you'll need to think about the mapping configuration to go from the auction entity and the update method to the auction updated contracts that we have. So there's a few things to think about, and it's a mildly challenging challenge to get this working. So please do give it a go, and you'll know you're successful because all of these tests will pass. And just to demonstrate that point, so once you've configured your consumers, then what you should be able to do is run the tests inside this checkpoint. But whilst you're going through this and you're creating your consumers, just run these individually just so you can make sure and see what you're doing as you're going through these. Don't be afraid to use the debugger as well if you want to find out what's going on and what you've got inside your message, what you're doing. Also, whether or not you're using Automapper, have you got that configured correctly? Those sort of things. So please give this a go, but don't worry if you get stuck on this, because I'm going to go through what I did very shortly to get this done. But what you should find is that once you have this configured, then when you run these requests, then you should find that all of the tests pass and none of them fail. And the auction gets created when we update it in the search service. Then when we get the updated item from that search service, we get that with the updated field, which is what's happening when we do update the auction. Then we go ahead and delete it, and the final test is to make sure that we cannot find it in the database, and we get 0 results when we search for something with that name. So please do give this a go. Like I say, I'm going to run through it with you anyway afterwards. So good luck with this, and I'll see you in the next lesson to show you what I did to achieve this.